Hi everyone, today is our first day of trigonometry. We know how sides are related to each other in a right triangle. We recall Pythagorean theorem. The Pythagorean theorem formula is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Remember that a and b represent the legs of the triangle and c represent the hypotenuse, which is the longest side and the side that is opposite the right angle. Pythagorean theorem only works if we know two sides and we are looking for the missing third side. But what if we know one side and one angle and we want to find another side? Or what if we know two sides and we want to find one of the missing angles? We use trigonometry. So now we have to ask ourselves, how are the sides related to the angles? Well, listed below, it says sine, cosine, and tangent. These are going to be our trigonometry functions that we will use to find either the missing side or the missing angle. And they're all written in ratios. So before we start to label and go over those ratios, just to review our vocabulary, adjacent. You see the word adjacent, it means next to. Opposite means across from. And then your hypotenuse is the side across from the 90-degree angle. So that's some important information you're going to need in order to fill out these triangles. So we'll start with the sine ratio. It says the sine of an angle equals the opposite side to angle over hypotenuse. Cosine angle is adjacent side to angle over hypotenuse. And tangent angle equals the opposite side to angle over adjacent side to angle. So in this triangle, where it says x, if I wanted to label this triangle, here's x, that's my angle. The hypotenuse, remember, is always the angle that's across from the 90 degrees, so I can label that the 90-degree angle is here, which means that this is my hypotenuse. And the opposite side would be the side that's across from the x. That's my O here. And the adjacent side, the side that is next to, would be this side here. That's my A. Now if I was to look at the other triangle where it's labeled with Y, I can start with the hypotenuse angle. It's always the one that's across from the 90. The side that's opposite would be this side here. And the side that it's adjacent and next to is this side here. So we're going to use these ratios and we're going to fill out these triangles in order to find either the missing side or the missing angle. So an easy way to remember the ratios is SOHCAHTOA. So if you remember this phrase, SOHCAHTOA, it's going to help you remember the ratios. So sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent equals opposite over adjacent. So that O, A, and H goes along with the vocabulary that we just went over. SOHCAHTOA, that's your key phrase here. Remember, the angle determines which side is opposite and which side is adjacent. So the opposite side and the adjacent side switch based on the angle. Hypotenuse always stays the same, just like in these two diagrams. The H is in the same spot because the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. Also remember that the calculator must be in degree mode whenever you are doing trigonometry. So in order to get that in degree mode, you're going to press mode on your calculator, and then in the third row, you're going to make sure degrees is on. So in the third row, it either says radians or degrees. So you're going to scroll down to the third row, and you're going to scroll to the right where it says degrees and just hit enter so that degrees is selected, because that is what we're going to need to solve these problems. So for question 1, we're just going to be setting up the proportions with the sine, cosine, and tangent fractions. So question 1 says find a sine of A. So if we remember our phrase SOHCAHTOA, sine, remember it was SOHCAHTOA, so SOH for O equals. So sine of A just means that I'm looking at the angle A here. So if A here is my theta, that's just another way that we can call the angle. The side that is the hypotenuse I'll label first. The side opposite the right angle, that's my H. And then the side that's opposite or across from is the 5. And that leaves the 12 as the adjacent side, the side that is next to the angle. So now setting out this portion, remember sine of A equals the opposite over the hypotenuse. So the opposite is the 5. And then the hypotenuse is 13. So 5 over 13 is my fraction. B says cosine A. So remember it's SOHCAHTOA, so this ka is this the A over H. So that means I'm going to set up a fraction, and we're still using that angle A, so I can leave my labels on the triangle. Adjacent side is the 12, and the hypotenuse is the 13. So 12 over 13 is my fraction. And the last one, C, tangent of A is TOA for tangent, opposite over adjacent. So for this angle A, the opposite was 5, and the adjacent A was 12. Notice for D, E, and F, they're telling you that the angle we're using, theta, is the angle B. So I'm going to erase my markings because remember our adjacent and our opposite side change based on your angle. So now I'm looking at B. I'm going to call that theta. This is the angle. To label all my sides, well, my hypotenuse always stays the same. It's always the angle, the side that's opposite the 90-degree angle. Opposite would be the 12 here, and the one that's adjacent, the one that's next to, is the 5. So now we're going to complete G, E, and F. Remember it's SOHCAHTOA, S-O over H. So opposite, I label that as 12. Hypotenuse, that was 13. So 12 over 13 is my fraction. Then I'm going to be doing cosine of B. Remember, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent, I labeled my A was 5. And my hypotenuse I labeled was 13. The last question, tangent of B. Remember, TOA, tangent equals opposite over adjacent. The side that was opposite was 12, and the adjacent was 5. so 12 over 5. So remember, whenever you are labeling your sides, the adjacent and the opposite side can change, so you want to label them and be very careful of that. So question 2, use a calculator to round to the nearest tenth. So we're going to be finding the sine, cosine, and tangent of these numbers that they give us. So for A, tangent of 25, you're going to hit the tangent button on your calculator and then type in the 25 and hit enter. When you do that, you're going to get a decimal. Your decimal would be 0.46. So because they're asking you to round to the nearest tenth, I'm just going to write it to the nearest hundredth first, so we practice our rounding. So if it's 0.46, the tenths place is where that 4 is. You look at the number that's behind it. The number behind it is a 6, which means that I round that 4 up to 0.5. Letter B, cosine of 17. So hit the cosine button in your calculator, then type in 17, hit enter. You'll get 0.95. And make sure we're looking at the tenths place. The number behind that is a 5, which means that I'm going to round that 9 up. So that becomes 1.0. Remember that 9 would be a 10, so I move it up. And then I need to have that 0.0 here because it's round to the nearest 10, so I need to have a number in that place. C, sine of 48. I want you to hit sine in your calculator, type in 48, hit enter. You'll get 0.74. Look at that tenths place. The number that's behind it is a 4, which means that we stay the same. Remember, 5 and above, round up. Below 5, we stay the same. D is cosine of 100. When you type in cosine and then 100 in your calculator, you'll get negative 0.17. We want to look at the tenths place and the number behind it. The number behind it is a 7, which is greater than 5, so I round up. That 0.1 becomes a 0.2, so negative 0.2. E, the sine of 224. Type sine in your calculator, 224. You'll get negative 0.69. Look at the tenths place. The number behind it is a 9, which means that I round that 6 up. It becomes negative 0.7. And then our last one, F, tan of 240. Type tangent in your calculator, type in 240, and then you'll get 1.73. Look at the tenths place, the number behind it is a 3, which means that that 7 stays the same. 1.7 is my answer. So the important thing for this is just to remember that your calculator needs to be in degree mode, and you're using those buttons on your calculator that say sine, cosine, tangent. They're 3 buttons that are right next to each other. Now we're going to use the sine function to solve for the missing side of a triangle. Remember the sine function in the phrase SOHCAHTOA, it was the opposite over the hypotenuse. So the abbreviation SOH, or the sine angle, equals the opposite side to the angle over the hypotenuse. Remember that the angle determines which side is opposite and which side is adjacent, so just be careful of how you're labeling those two sides. The directions: solve for the missing side using one of the 3 trigonometric functions from above. Round your answers to the nearest hundredth. So for all these examples, 1 through 4, we're going to be using the sine function. Question 1. They give you the angle of 37 and the 90-degree angle, and the two sides are labeled x and 15. So we're going to use the angle that they give us. The angle they give us is 37. You can also call that theta. And we're going to use that to label the other sides. So the side x is the one that's opposite. So I can label the x as O, just meaning it's the opposite side. The 15 is the hypotenuse side because it's across from the 90-degree angle, that little box here. So when it's across from it, label it as my hypotenuse. So now that I have my O and H labeled, I can use the sine function. So my formula is sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse, and I'm just going to abbreviate O over H. Now you want to fill in everything. So my theta, my angle, is 37. So I'm going to rewrite this, but I'm going to write sine of 37 equals, I want to fill in the opposite and the hypotenuse. The opposite here is x, I don't know that value, and the hypotenuse is 15. So remember here, I'm trying to solve for x. Probably the easiest way that you could do this is that you would set this up as a proportion. So if I make this a proportion, I'm going to make this sine 37 over 1. And now I have two fractions that are equal to each other. Remember, to solve for two fractions that are equal to each other, proportion, we simply cross multiply. So I would multiply 1 times x. When you multiply 1 times x, it would just be 1x, or x by itself, equals, now I'm going to do sine 37 times 15. X equals sine 37 times 15. So now you're going to type this line into your calculator. Hit the sine button, type in 37, close the parentheses for the sine, and then you're going to hit times 15. When you do that, you'll get x equals 9.027. Remember, this question asked us for the nearest hundredth, so I'm going to put the nearest thousandth on paper, and then I'm going to show how I rounded it. So the hundredth place is where that 2 is. The number that's behind it is a 7. It's greater than 5, which means I round up. So that 2 will become a 3. So x equals 9.03. So that is the side length of x. Question 2. It gives us two sides, the side of 15 and the side of x, the angle that is 90 and the angle that is 37. First step is you want to identify the angle that we're using. The angle that they give us is 37. That's our theta. The side that's opposite that is the side that is labeled 15. So I want to label that as an O, opposite. And the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. So going across the right angle, hypotenuse is x. Again, I see that I'm using the O and the H, so my opposite hypotenuse, which means I use the sine function. So the formula is always going to be sine of theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. Setting up, and I want to imply, I want to put in all those values from the triangle. So sine, I'm going to fill in my theta, fill in my angle. My angle was 37 equals The opposite I labeled as 15. And the hypotenuse I labeled as x. So in order to solve for x, I want to make this a proportion. Sine 37 is by itself, but I can make it a fraction if I put it over 1. Now I have two fractions equal to each other, which means that I can cross multiply. And when I do that, I'll get sine of 37 times x equals 15 times 1, that's just 15. So I don't want you to hit the sine 37 button and then times by x. What we're going to do is we're just going to do the steps that we would normally do in an equation to get x by itself. So notice that sine 37 is multiplying x. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by sine 37. It's okay that you don't know the value of that. When you do that to both sides, it will cancel on the left side. So you're left with x by itself. X equals. You want to take your calculator and you want to divide here 15 divided by sine 37. So when you put into your calculator, just write that we're going to divide in our calculators. When you divide in your calculator 15 divided by sine 37, you will get x equals 24.924. And remember, we're rounding it to the nearest hundredth place. So the hundredth place is the 2. The number behind it was the 4. 4 means that I stayed the same. So that 2 is going to stay, it doesn't change. My new decimal is 24.92. So that is the side of x, or the side of the hypotenuse in this problem. So your homework for today is to complete questions 3 and 4.